The other alternative, or rather complementary shading method, is technically quite simple but somewhat complex in execution. This method, which you may have noticed in almost all of my drawings, involves adding a layer of flat black color in the darkest areas of the character. I usually add these shadows immediately after the inking process, before coloring, but sometimes I also do it after adding color. In any case, to add black shadows, the first thing we have to do is create a dedicated layer for them, which we can rename, and then select our pen tool with an absolute black color. Now, on the layer we have just created, we will draw new lines to divide the planes shadowed with basic shading from the planes that will be completely blackened. This is somewhat complex, because if we use too much black shading, our image will look very simple and difficult to read. We also have to try to avoid creating overly complex shadows, since, in my opinion, this will create a strange dissonance between the simplicity of our inking and coloring style and the shading. Therefore, I recommend you proceed gradually, from less to more, and start with the most obvious shadows. As on so many previous occasions, in this case too, less is more. For example, looking at the reference we have been using all along, which would you say are the most evident shading areas? I think they are all these here on the left side of the face and on the neck. We can also see all the quite pronounced secondary shadows in the left eye socket here and on the nose. But for now, let's start with the primary shadows. I'm going to start with the neck. Thus, following the reference, I'm going to draw a diagonal line that goes down to this point, and I'm going to continue diagonally downwards to the left. As you see, I'm not being entirely faithful to my reference. For me, the reference is just that, a reference, but I believe that the artistic and expressive criterion should prevail over the rigidity of the example. In this particular case, for example, I think that if I follow the reference to the letter, I will have to shade a large part of the area that has already been shaded, creating too great a balance between light and dark colors. It's hard to explain, and I suppose it depends a lot on the style you choose, but in my case, I try to be very careful with the flat blacks and use them selectively and expressively. Once we have delimited the area we want to shade, it's enough to choose the fill tool and fill it in. If you have any problem doing this, make sure you have the tool configured correctly. It's easy for the tool to not be set up correctly if we have to keep adjusting parameters like close gap, tolerance, and refer to other layers. In fact, let's take the opportunity to talk about a parameter we haven't discussed until now, but it's very interesting: the area scaling parameter. I usually always have it enabled and set to positive values, between 3 and 10, roughly. Why? Well, let's see what this parameter does. To see it clearly, let's zoom in on the pupil, since it's easier to understand this parameter if we work with high contrast colors. If I deactivate the parameter here on the left and try to paint this pupil, the following happens. Can you see it? If we zoom in even more, we can see clearly that the program has not convincingly connected the two areas, but there is a line of pixels that haven't been entirely covered by the paint. Technically, this is because the edges of the lines are not completely sharp, but are delimited by pixels of lower opacity to smooth out the finish and rendering of the lines, known as anti-aliasing. All this technical explanation is not very important actually, but it is important to understand what happens if we increase the value of the area scaling to 3 or 4, for example. If we do it and paint the same pupil again, we see that line has disappeared completely and the finish is much better. This happens because the area scaling parameter does exactly that, increasing or expanding the paint stains we make with the fill tool so that they spill over or under our inking lines. Since we are using pure black, the same color as our lines, this overlap is imperceptible and makes the black stains perfect, without white pixels or uncovered pixels. Let's apply the paint tool again to the white part of the eye. If we do it without the area scaling option activated, we can see an uncovered pixel line along the edge. If we activate the option with a value of 3, for example, and paint the same area again, this line disappears. Although this won't be very useful to us in this tutorial, I want to tell you something else about this parameter. You can achieve very interesting effects if you set the area scaling parameter to a negative value. Let's try giving it a value of -3 and see what happens. What do you think? As I say, this is not very useful to us right now, but I believe this technique can achieve very striking effects for creating sinister characters or those that emit light from within. But for now, let's go back to our character. In conclusion, we can say that on most occasions you will benefit from having the area scaling option activated with a positive value, between 3 and 5, for example. Back in our workspace, we can continue to use the pen tool and the fill tool to add areas of flat shadow in the darkest areas of our character. In principle, all these areas of black shadow should be restricted to areas that have already been previously shaded with basic shading. And once again, remember that less is more. Also remember that you can use the eraser tool or the lasso tool to trim parts of the shadows you've created, and you can use the pen tool to add more shadows.
I will guide you through the rest of the process, but as you'll see, I'm basically using the same tools over and over again. Here I'm using the pen tool to create another division that I clean up with the eraser tool. Then I go up here, try to take into account the shade of the hair, something like this. And let's continue by closing the shape here, okay? I know it's not finished, but this will allow me to get a feel of how things are looking so far. Okay, not bad. Then I will close this shape here to add more black. I don't like it. I will open it again, just with the eraser tool.
I think I told you before, but to me this feels kind of like sculpting. You add shapes and remove shapes using the tools that we have. It really feels like an artistic process, like an organic process to me. I don't know. I like it.
So I will leave it all black, all this area of the eyelid. Then, following my reference, I will go down from here and I paint it black, and then I will darken this area here. I think it's better if I go this way, and I use the pen to correct this, and I paint all this area. I usually refer to the navigator view up here to get also another point of view, let's say, another perspective of the character. Sometimes when you zoom in, you lose the perspective. So it's a good idea to keep an eye on the navigator panel. Okay, I think it's better now. I will add some black shades here. And as you can see, probably there's no reason for leaving these two areas without the shadow. I just think it looks better. If I just shade them completely, it's not bad, but I think it adds some interest to leave these areas with the original color. But then again, I don't think it's very realistic, but I don't mind. Okay, I will add some extra shade here and there. Let's shade this part of the head. This was an accident because I only wanted to shade this area, but I accidentally colored all of this. But actually, I like it, so I will allow it to stay there. I will put some black color here and here, and here, undo. Let's add some extra shade here to accentuate the three-dimensionality here.
And this is actually a technique that I use quite often and that I would like to share with you. When I want to get sharp angles, like a very sharp corner, I don't use the pen tool because, as you can see, it's quite difficult. It looks rounded. So usually I go beyond the mark that I want to achieve, and then with the eraser tool I pass over it and then I clean it. I cut it. Again, almost like sculpting. And as you can see, the result is quite sharp, very clean. So again, if you want to achieve these clean angles, I suggest you go with the pen tool beyond the point where you want to get at, and then with the eraser tool you go back and you clean it.
I will project some shadow of the hat here. I think it's good. And then I will add some shades here and there. Something like that. Okay, I think it's enough. I think I'm starting to add too much black here. But let me try to reinforce this line here a little bit. Not much, but something like this should be enough. The area of the nose, usually I leave it without shades, without flat black shades, because I don't know, it creates a weird effect, some kind of weird mustache down there, or it looks some kind of dog nose. I don't know, I don't like it. So most of the time I don't apply flat black shades in that area. Maybe I can add some black shades here to darken the hair, this area a little bit. And maybe let's add another line here, another division, so we can paint black all this area below here. Okay, I'm quite satisfied with the results. Let me take a look again. Oh yeah, I think I forgot to paint this. Yeah. Okay, I think it's better now. Let's add a little bit more of interest here by adding some simple zigzag lines. A little bit more here and there. But basically, that's it. Maybe at this point you want to add a few extra texture or structural lines, as I called them before. It's a good idea, sometimes I do it. To do that, you create a new layer. I will call it extra lines. And with a thin pen, like for example 5, you can try to go around the character and adding some few texture lines here and there. For example, I like this one. Let's see what happens if I add another one here. It's good. It's good. Another one here. This one doesn't work. Maybe like this is better. Let's add a few more here. Or down here. Yeah, I like that one.
And now I'll try to add another one down here, down the neck. I like it. So I'll let it be there. As you can see, what I'm trying to do mostly is try to follow the volumes of the figure. Try to emphasize them so they are easier to read. Also, adding lines next to the black areas sometimes helps to create some kind of gradient effect, but it's easy to overdo it, so be careful with that. For example, you saw me here trying a few times, but I don't like them. I think it's too much. So in the end, I just don't include them. I just undo and I go somewhere else. Again, this shadow here, the neck, I think is too much. So I will just remove it and go back to the original. So you can see how it looks now. Without and with, on, off, before, after. Well, as you can see, the changes are very subtle, but probably it's for the best. Don't overdo it, just add a few more lines, some subtle effects, and probably that's all you need. Now it's time for you to apply the flat black shading technique to your character. When you have finished, you will have something more or less like this. You can quickly check the effect of these black shadows by turning the layer's visibility off and on. What do you think? It's quite a personal choice, but I really like working with this type of shadows. If you feel it's too much for you, you can try reducing the opacity of this layer. This way, you will achieve a softer and more gradual result, similar to the one we got with the basic shading and inverted shading layers. Similarly, you can try combining the 3 layers to obtain a total of 4 lighting planes, although this has the advantages and disadvantages we discussed earlier. In my case, I'm going to choose to stay with just one shading layer, the basic shading, and the layer of black shadows.